Johnny Carson knew the look instantly, even before the audience noticed it. The way the studio seemed to quiet around a man who had once filled rooms without trying. The way applause softened into something heavier, more careful. The way people leaned forward, not out of excitement, but concern. Because the guest walking onto the Tonight Show stage that night was clearly dying, and everyone knew it. The cancer had stripped weight from his frame, drained color from his face, and turned a larger-than-life presence into something fragile. And as he settled into the chair across from Johnny's desk, the crowd gave a standing ovation that felt less like celebration and more like a goodbye. And Johnny, who had spent decades mastering timing, tone, and emotional control, felt the familiar pressure to do what everyone expected, to slow down, to soften his voice, to treat this moment like a memorial delivered early. But he refused to do it, because he could see in his guest's eyes the same thing he'd seen backstage before the show. Exhaustion not just from illness, but from pity, from being spoken to like a ghost who hadn't quite left yet, from people mourning him while he was still breathing. And when the applause finally faded, Johnny looked at him, took in the gaunt face and thinner shoulders, and said with perfect casual timing, "Well, you look great. I mean, really. Whatever diet this is, I'm canceling my steak tonight." And the studio froze for half a second, producers holding their breath, audience unsure whether to laugh. And then the guest did something no one had seen him do in weeks. He laughed. Real laughter, sharp and surprised and relieved. Because for the first time in a long time, someone hadn't treated him like a tragedy. Johnny didn't ask about treatments, didn't mention courage or prayers or legacy. He launched straight into stories, teased him about past flops, complained about network executives, poked fun at both of them getting older in a business obsessed with youth. And as the minutes passed, the tension drained from the room. The audience stopped watching a dying man and started watching two old pros doing what they'd always done, trading jokes, interrupting each other, laughing at the wrong moments. And backstage, the crew noticed something remarkable. The guest sat up a little straighter. His voice grew stronger, his eyes brighter, because Johnny Carson had given him something no doctor or fan could give: normalcy, dignity, the chance to just be himself one more time without the weight of farewell hanging over every word. And when the segment ended, Johnny didn't stand, didn't rush over, didn't turn it into a sentimental embrace. He shook his hand like he would any other guest and said, "Don't be a stranger, but maybe call first so I can hide the good jokes." And the guest smiled, nodded, and walked off to another long ovation, one that felt different now, lighter, warmer, less like mourning, and more like respect. And later that night, someone asked Johnny why he hadn't acknowledged the obvious, why he hadn't said something meaningful about legacy or bravery. And Johnny answered simply that the man didn't need another reminder that he was dying. He needed a reminder that he was still alive. And years later, when people spoke about that appearance, they didn't remember the illness as much as they remembered the laughter, because Johnny Carson understood something most people miss, that sometimes the greatest kindness isn't saying goodbye. It's refusing to say it too soon. Late one afternoon, the studio lights were dimmed, and the audience had gone home. The familiar desk sat empty, and the host lingered on the Tonight Show stage longer than usual, running his fingers along the edge of the desk as if it were an old friend, because for decades this space had been where he was strongest, sharpest, most alive. Yet now even here whispers followed him. Whispers about age, about slowing down, about how long he could keep going, and though he joked about it nightly, privately, it weighed on him more than anyone realized. Then, one evening, a longtime friend, a towering figure of Hollywood grit and toughness, came to visit the show backstage. A man whose body was failing even as his reputation loomed larger than life. A man the public saw as unbreakable, but who now moved carefully, deliberately, carrying pain he rarely acknowledged. When the host first saw him standing near the curtains waiting to be announced, thinner than before, face worn, posture guarded, the room instinctively shifted into that familiar, uncomfortable quiet. People adopt around someone they know is suffering. Assistants softened their voices. Producers offered chairs. Sympathy hung in the air like smoke, and the friend felt it immediately. That invisible weight of pity, the sense that everyone had already begun saying goodbye. And before anyone could speak, the host cut through it with the same timing that had carried him through thousands of monologues, looking him up and down and saying loudly, "Well, I see you finally decided to stop intimidating the rest of us by losing a few pounds. Must be nice to let the rest of Hollywood feel tall for once." The room froze. Then the friend laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that startled everyone. The kind that comes from relief, from being seen not as a fragile symbol but as a man. And just like that, the tension evaporated, because the host hadn't offered sympathy. He'd offered normalcy, the rarest gift of all. Later that night, instead of rushing to the desk, the host waved the band to hold, walked the friend out on stage without introduction, sat him beside the desk like it was the most natural thing in the world, and launched into conversation that avoided illness entirely, teasing him about his stubbornness, his temper, his refusal to retire, mocking his legendary scowl, provoking him into snapping back with gravel-voiced sarcasm that brought the audience to roaring laughter. And for those minutes under the studio lights, the friend wasn't a dying icon or a cautionary tale. He was just himself, trading barbs, telling stories, complaining about directors and scripts and the state of Hollywood, the host guiding the rhythm effortlessly, never letting the mood dip into sentimentality, never allowing applause to turn into sympathy, because he understood something most people didn't, that when someone is nearing the end, what they often want most isn't comfort, but dignity, not silence, but familiarity, not careful words, but the sound of their own laughter. After the segment ended, the host didn't rush him off, didn't offer grand words, simply clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You did good, kid. Don't get soft on me now." And backstage they sat together away from cameras, the host sipping coffee, the friend nursing a drink he barely touched, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Bad jokes, old rivalries, ridiculous rumors, moments from years ago that only the two of them remembered. And though neither said it out loud, both understood. This might be the last time they shared a stage, the last time they'd sit like this, but the host refused to turn it into a farewell, because farewells belong to the living, not the dying. Days later, staff members noticed the change, how the friend left lighter than he arrived, how he stood a little taller, smiled a little longer, and months later, when news came that he was gone, the host didn't speak about that night on air, didn't dedicate a monologue or play a montage. He simply opened the show as always, sharp and composed, But those who knew him well saw the pause before the first joke, the breath he took, the weight behind the smile. Years later, when asked why he never talked about that visit, the host shrugged and said, "Because it wasn't about television, it was about friendship." And long after reruns replaced live broadcasts, people who had been there that night remembered not the jokes themselves, but the feeling, the sudden shift from sadness to laughter, the reminder that even legends want to be treated like people, not memorials, and that sometimes the greatest kindness isn't what you say about someone's pain, but what you refuse to let that pain take from them. Because on that Tonight Show stage, under the bright lights and familiar music, one man quietly gave another something priceless, the chance to feel alive, respected, unchanged, if only for a little while longer. In the weeks that followed, those closest to him noticed a subtle shift. The host returned to the desk night after night with the same jokes and timing. Yet there was a deeper patience in his pauses, a quieter warmth in how he spoke to guests, as if that off-camera moment had reminded him what truly mattered. When the news finally came that his old friend had passed, he didn't address it on air, didn't dedicate a monologue or ask for applause. He simply did the show, because that's what his friend would have wanted. Dignity without spectacle, life continuing without being reduced to a farewell, and years later, when staffers recalled the greatest lesson they learned working beside him, it wasn't about ratings or comedy or fame. It was about knowing when to drop the act and when not to, about understanding that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone facing the end is to let them forget it's coming, to laugh, to argue, to feel normal one last time. And in that quiet understanding, the legacy lived on long after the lights dimmed. And long after the lights dimmed on The Tonight Show and the desk was cleared for the final time, that quiet kindness lived on, passed through stories, memories, and laughter, reminding everyone who heard it that real compassion doesn't come from grand speeches or tearful goodbyes, but from knowing exactly who someone is, honoring that identity to the very end, and choosing humanity over sentiment when it matters most.